Welcome everybody to the webinar about when to quit your startup and get a corporate job. Now, we used quit as part of our marketing and advertising, but it doesn't need to be so loom and gloom. We don't have to quit your startup altogether. Sometimes you just need to take a break. Maybe the market timing isn't right. Maybe you just want to maybe take a mental break from it or just see what it's like to get a regular corporate job. I know with the economy and things right now, funding can be a little bit scarce. So you can look at this as when to pause your startup and your great idea, get a regular job, and then maybe you can come back to it later. So it doesn't always have to be quit. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Corey. I'm the founder of careershakers.com. It's a career coaching business where I help people switch careers, or in our cases here, switch from being an entrepreneur to getting a job back in the corporate lens. I specialize and focus only on corporate roles, so marketing, accounting, finance, sales, HR, legal, operations, etc. And I pretty much helped everybody in every industry. So tech, because I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area, but also pharmaceuticals, life sciences, higher education, CPG, fashion, you name it. I've probably helped people land a job there. And I do have a regular day job as a recruiter for one of the big tech companies out here. And so I am able to take all the lessons I learned during my regular job and then turn around, package things up, synthesize them down, and help people find a new career, find a new job, find something that they're really passionate about. And this webinar series or this webinar was actually recommended to me by someone in the startup community where they thought this would be a very helpful context for some of you to keep in mind. Not that we are trying to wish you any bad ill or intentions, but sometimes you may need to consider what it would be like to get a regular job and put your startup on pause. Now, for those of you who don't know me or haven't checked out any of my YouTube videos and you're wondering, okay, why should I even listen to this guy? I have been doing coaching for a while, and you can check out my website, careershakers.com. I've got some client testimonials on there. I've helped people move from accounting into marketing, which actually tends to be a super popular route. I've helped someone go from finance to operations, HR to marketing, and then I help people break into either the tech space, software space. That's been a really popular niche over the past few years. Now, I myself do not have a technical background. I do technical recruiting and non-technical recruiting, but I myself am not an engineer. So I am not able to help people who are studying for coding interviews or pass LeetCode code questions. That is outside of my area of expertise. I focus mainly on the career transition and career planning portion of everyone's journey. All right, let me just check the chat here. Cool. I can see some people putting in what they're working on, how they can look for help. Don't be shy, take advantage of the opportunity. And I don't want this to feel like a lecture. I know like school and lectures are like, ugh, right? So I will be checking the chat every slide that I go through. Put your questions in there. Let me know how I can help you, anything that's top of mind. I'd love to help you out, especially since you took time late this evening on a Wednesday. Let's start framing this a little bit. And I want people to be honest here. This is a safe space. Please be honest. We're going to be referencing this answer for you all throughout today's session. So put in the chat, what does success look like for you as an entrepreneur or as someone who works or runs their own startup? Which one of these options or which one of these things resonates with you the most? Like what's your true goal? Like why did you become an entrepreneur? Why did you start your own company? Oh yes, we definitely want those $110 million buyouts, right? There's nothing wrong with wanting to make a little bit of money, especially if you've got a great idea. Free up your time, be your own boss. That seems to be a very popular response so far. Come on, nobody wants to be famous. No one wants to be the next Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, Tony Robbins, doing what you love. Okay, we got 2 people for doing what they love, 3 people for doing what they love. Okay, excellent. This is going to be something that I think all of you can probably resonate with. And one thing that you should definitely keep in mind as you're thinking about what you would want to do as your startup grows, or if you're reaching a fork in the road, which is maybe potentially why you're here, if the startup isn't going as well as you thought, what can you do as an alternative so that you can also achieve this goal, but also find other routes and alternatives to get there? And I know some of you may have come from the corporate space, may have already had a regular job, job, and you didn't have a great experience. But based on some of the people that I've coached, and I have helped entrepreneurs transition back into corporate jobs, you can actually achieve all of these things by working for somebody else. I know it's crazy. It's totally crazy, but hear me out, and I can promise you that there is a way to do A, B, C, and D by working for somebody else or for having a regular job. Now, please don't shoot the messenger here, but this is just based on stats, and I have the source down there, HubSpot.com. But 90% of startups do fail. There's a variety of different reasons, which we'll go over in the next few slides. But the unfortunate reality is that 90% of startups, companies, entrepreneurs will fail. And it's not always due to your fault. It doesn't mean that you are not a good employee, you're not a smart person, you don't know how to run an effective business. There are many different factors that could impact this, right? And I'm sure even some of you know, like if you're trying to open a restaurant, does anyone know what percentage of new restaurants fail within the first 2 years? Take a guess. Yeah, yeah. It's actually, yeah, it's pretty close. It's like 86% of restaurants will fail within the first 2 years. It doesn't mean that their food was bad, right? I'm sure you don't open a restaurant thinking, I'm going to make mediocre food and serve it to people so they can just eat my average food. People who open restaurants generally believe that they cook really good food and they want to share that experience with others. But unfortunately, 90% of these things will fail. And I'm not here to discourage you, but I'm also trying to make sure that all of you don't get blindsided by this. And some of you can start to think about a contingency plan for yourself. Now, if there is let's imagine there was a graph, right? And at the bottom axis is your time doing your startup, and then on the y-axis is like the the perfect moment where you could quit, right? If you could quit at the perfect time from your startup or put it on pause, obviously everyone would do that. But it's just like predicting the market. You can't really tell when's a good time to buy, when's a good time to sell. You never really know. But if there was this period here where this is the perfect time to put your startup on pause, it is far better to pause your startup while you're going on the way up than if you were to pause or quit a little too late. You'd rather be too early than too late. And I'll explain why in a minute. But in a shortened version, when you're looking for other jobs, it's far easier to get a job when you can tell them that your startup was doing well, but you're looking to make a transition because of X, Y, and Z, as opposed to saying, oh yeah, my startup ran out of funding, or I wasn't able to sell enough product, or I went bankrupt, or I wasn't able to do as well and now I need a regular job. It's far easier, like someone would rather hire a successful entrepreneur than someone who had a startup fail and is now in desperation mode looking for a job. So it's far better to quit, quote unquote, quit a little too early than a little too late. And I know that's the biggest fear that all of you may have. I've been working with a few entrepreneurs, and that's the biggest fear, right? Is if I quit too early, I could have maybe I could have made it big if I just gave it 3 more months, 4 more months. I could have had my big break. But if you're not too sure, you have financial constraints or whatever your situation may be, it is far better to do it early than too late. You can always come back. You can always come back. But quitting is also seen as failure. Aha, I hear that one all the time as well. Quitting is also seen as a failure. Now, I think for those of you who grew up as athletes, right, you would hear that all the time, right? There's no such thing as losers, just quitters. But you're not quitting, you're taking a pause. Taking a pause. You're not totally quitting your startup, you're not abandoning your idea, but sometimes you may need to take a pause and come back for it. And this is just a quote that I like to always kind of drive home the point, which is he who fails to plan is planning to fail. Sir Winston Churchill. Again, not trying to wish any of you bad ill, but it's good to have a contingency plan, or at least be thinking about an alternative in case your startup does not pan out as well as you believe it is in terms of your success. There's a lot of entrepreneurs I've worked with who wanted to work for themselves because they wanted to be their own boss. And I've even seen that in the chat. But some entrepreneurs realize, hey, it's way more stressful running my own company. I got to worry about paying people. I got to worry about doing sales. I got to worry about doing marketing. I got to build a product. I got to like work with supply chain and vendors. Like, people don't show up to work on time. It's so stressful. Yes, working for someone else can also be stressful, but it's different kinds of stress. Same thing with making a bunch of money. I know we all have grandeurs and ideas of becoming the next big Google, the next big Facebook, the next big Uber. Less than 10% of people get to do that, right? So in today's session, which is roughly, it should be about like 45, 50-ish minutes of like some content, and then I'm going to have a lot of time for Q&A at the end. But we're definitely going to be talking about when you should potentially quit or pause, how to tell when it's the right time for you. If you are looking to pause or quit, what is the best job that you can probably get? And then ultimately, how do you break down that barrier and get that job? There's going to be a lot of hesitancies, and I hear this all the time from entrepreneurs and CEOs is, well, who's going to want to hire me as an individual contributor again? Or who's going to hire me instead of a CEO as a director or as a manager? How am I going to convince people to actually hire me if I haven't been in that role in a while? So we're going to talk about all those things. Not sure if you say you're pausing your startup as a hiring manager, I would definitely not move ahead. You are basically looking for a temp gig. Yeah, you wouldn't use the word I'm pausing my startup because that obviously tells them that you're not committed in the interview. So let's first talk about when potentially you should consider taking a pause from your startup. I wish I had a crystal ball. I wish I could tell all of you the same thing. Like in exactly 5 years, if you don't hit this revenue number, or you don't break even, or you aren't able to build an MVP in this number of years, then you should just pack it up and quit. It's not that simple. There's no hard, fast rule. There's no like general guideline. It's going to be different for every single person because all of you are going to have different financial constraints. You're all going to be operating in different markets, different sectors. The market timing is going to be different for everybody. Some of you may have some regulatory issues that other business models don't have to worry about. It's all very, very different. You may have multiple partners that you're running your startup with, so you can split the costs and the expensive and the expenses and all these things. Maybe you don't have a family to support, or maybe you do have a family to support. You've got a mortgage. Every single person is different. But what this picture is meant to depict is that because it is different for everyone, the only way to know when is the best time to quit or pause is by setting milestones for yourself. You need to set realistic time-based milestones that are tied to business metrics. And if you aren't able to hit these milestones, that's when you need to start to plan in advance for an alternative. I'll say that again. You need to set realistic milestones that are time-based and tied to business metrics. Everyone's business metric and everyone's time is going to be different because all of you have different sources of funding, different business models, etc. But you need to have concrete milestones and you need to set goals with yourself and know that if I do not hit this, then I need to consider an alternative option. So how are you going to set these? Well, I highly recommend you think about it in 4 areas. The first one obviously is time. Duh. You should be setting goals at a minimum of every 6 months. Ideally, you could do them a little bit sooner than that, but you should have large milestones set for yourself and your business plan, at least every 6 months. You should be reflecting every 6 months, making sure you're making the type of progress that you need. That's the first one. The second one is finances. Obviously, you're going to need funding. You're going to need money to like operate your business, get it off the ground, Kickstarter campaign, road shows, talking to VCs, all that stuff. I totally get it. But you need to set realistic milestones in terms of what your run rate is. For those of you who haven't done your cash flow analysis, you all definitely need to do that. Need to understand what your run rate is, how quickly you're burning through some of your expenses and your reserves, and figure out when it is time for you to start having an alternative plan. You do not want to wait until you have no funding left to now think about getting a JOB. The general time frame that I tell people is when you're transitioning from a CEO role or running your own business to getting a regular JOB, you need to allot yourself 6 months of runway to get a JOB. Okay, 6 months. You may get it faster for sure, but some of the folks I've worked with, 6 months. And given the current market conditions today, which are not ideal, yeah, probably want to give yourself at least 6 months, which is why you shouldn't be waiting until, oh, I have no funding left, like time to go get a job, because by then it's too late, because you're going to have to wait and find a way to make money for up to 6 months possibly before you can actually get a steady stream of income again. You're going to also want to make sure you're listening to the market, which is number three. And this is where your business models are all going to be different. And some of you may not be selling products right away. Maybe some of you are developing some technology, some software, etc. But you still need to be able to listen to the market. You do some market research, you do some user testing, right? Try to get some any type of survey data going. Try to gauge the level of interest, the willingness to buy, as people who have gotten MBAs will call it. You need to test the willingness to buy from your customers or even from potential investors every 6 months and see what's the actual viability of this. A lot of great ideas, great products ultimately fail because of the business model and sometimes with the market timing. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea or it's a poor product, but some things are either in your control or out of your control. For example, for those of you who maybe were working on a startup, I don't know, in 2020, and you were planning on doing something that involved anything physical or people having to talk to each other, you kind of got screwed in 2020. Not your fault. You could have had the world's most amazing product. Maybe you needed someone to actually build things and everything literally shut down during COVID. So sometimes it has to do with like market timing, random acts of nature, and other things, but make sure you're listening to the market. If you're not able to sell enough right away, or you're not able to reach your Kickstarter goals, listen to the market and start to pivot and adapt. Maybe you can pivot early enough, change the business model, adapt the product, and then you could still be successful. Or maybe it's a sign telling you you should consider taking a pause. And then the fourth thing, which everyone always overlooks, which makes sense because we're told as entrepreneurs, as CEOs, there's going to be sacrifice. I totally get that. You're going to have to make sacrifices. You're going to have to work a little bit more. It's going to be more stressful, but it's going to be worth it at the end. We hear about all these things. And for some of us who have successful companies, it's very, very true. But you also need to consider how running your own company, the additional stress, etc., expenses is putting on strain on your personal lives. That could be your personal health. That could be your relationships with your spouse, with your children, with your friends, with your families. I've worked with some people who gave up their late 20s, early 30s working on their business, and one of my clients actually told me that their biggest regret was that they didn't have time for themselves, and they wished that they had actually had time to go out and date people. Now that they're in their 40s, they're still looking to find that special someone, but they wish that even though their company had done very well, there was someone for them to share it with. So you're going to want to factor in and definitely don't overlook your personal goals as well. Health, both physical and mental, as well as your relationships with the people that you care about the most. What do you tell those early investors' friends who invested in your venture? Well, everyone's going to have a slightly different tone, but whenever you do invest in a startup, there is an element of risk involved. And I'm sure your friends, investors, family, etc., all knew the risk when they decided to fund you in your venture. And you can word it as you're taking a pause. You can word it as the market timing isn't right. There's a lot of different ways that you could tell them about it. But sometimes you do have to acknowledge that the writing is on the wall. Maybe you can find a way to pay them back over time. Everyone kind of handles it differently. All right. So here are the really common reasons some startups don't unfortunately make it. Number one, super obvious, right? You run out of finances, you run out of funding. And especially in today's market, after the whole SVB crisis, I've heard getting funding is a bit more challenging, especially in some of the in a lot of the software crypto spaces, for sure. Lack of market demand, we covered that already. Number three, though, there could be strong competition and just your timing to the market isn't ideal. There are probably lots of companies who may be having similar products as you. Maybe they get to market a little bit faster than you. Unfortunate. Leadership challenges. For those of you who have co-founders, maybe you may be running into some friction with some of those folks. You're having a difference in opinion on where the company should go next, what kind of products you should build, which features you should be prioritizing, how you want to set up your business model, what your pricing strategy is going to be. That can lead to some tensions. There's one entrepreneur I worked with. He ended up asking to be bought out because he ran into quite a few leadership challenges as well. I know what we covered on the business model, but that is actually a huge fundamental component of whether or not a company will be successful, how you're planning on delivering the product, how you're planning on pricing the product, selling the product, what you're going to be using as your cost basis, where you're manufacturing things, how you're going to be distributing the products, etc. What's your marketing plan going to be like? How do you get money from marketing, etc. How are you going to expand the business over time? Maybe you had an initial good success, and as you try to expand and grow the business, you didn't set up the infrastructure quite well. I've heard that as well. Number six, for those of you who are in any of like the, I would say, highly sensitive areas these days, self-driving cars, um, anything related to pharmaceuticals, of course, anything that, the FDA has to approve, any type of like food or drink product, there's a lot of risk involved. There was a time where Uber and Lyft almost never even became real companies because the thought of allowing strangers to drive strangers around, there's huge legal implications around, potentially being kidnapped or other horrible things that could happen. From an insurance perspective, what happens if you're driving someone and you get into an accident, right? Like, who covers that? Lyft or the person's personal insurance? What happens if you get injured? What happens, like, how does the passenger get covered for all of their medical expenses? You could have a great business idea, but if you run into some regulatory challenges that were slightly out of your control, that could also derail a business, right? Like, there's a bunch of all these self-driving cars companies that are working on fantastic technologies, but if the government doesn't approve driverless cars, what are they going to do, right? And then of course people do burn out. It's also a common reason, and I know some of you may have had some PTSD from your previous jobs where you were also burning out in your regular job, and so you wanted to work for yourself. You thought you could, work on a beach like they advertise, in those movies and ads you get on Instagram. You could work remotely and build an e-commerce website and be drinking pina coladas in Cancun every single day, but you can still burn out even running your own company. Now, one thing that I think is a interesting perception that people have about getting, you know, job is that you can't make good money getting a job. I've heard that all the time, and that's why a lot of you may have chosen number A on the first slide as your real reason for becoming an entrepreneur is because you wanted to make a boatload of money. 110 million, I think, is what someone said, which is definitely great, big chunk of change for sure, absolutely. But you could also make very good money making a living working for another company. I'm based in the Bay Area, and these are the market rates that I've seen from the HR data that I have access to. And since I've done both like non-engineering roles and engineering roles, and these are very conservative numbers that I put up here. If you get a job at like a top tech company, your numbers would even be higher than this. So this is pretty conservative from what I've put up on here. And for non-eng corporate roles in that second column, that's like, your standard corporate jobs, marketing, accounting, finance, legal, sales, etc. All of them pay within like $20,000 of each other. Like some are a little, like some are on the higher end, obviously, in sales has a commissions component, but like finance and HR, that's like a $20,000 difference at most, but between each of them. And so this is kind of what you could expect to potentially make here in the Bay Area. If you're not in the Bay Area and you're like on the let's say you're in the Midwest, it's typically about a 15 to 20% difference in those in those geographies. And then if you're in, like, let's say Los Angeles, Seattle, San Diego, Austin, Texas, it's only about like a 5 to 10% difference from the Bay Area. And so you can still make quite a bit of money, even if you had a regular job. Maybe this is a little bit of motivation that some of you didn't realize you needed, but I thought this would be helpful to put things into perspective and context. All right, so next we're going to talk about what job you should apply to if you're thinking about putting your startup on pause. But I guess I should also go on pause real quick. I've been checking the chat, but are there any questions that people have at this point in time? Oh, thanks for tuning in from South Africa. That's really cool. Hawaii, welcome. I'm actually from Hawaii. but I live in the Bay Area now. Oh yes, will we lose jobs to Chat GPT and AI and things like that? Let's start with this one. When we're thinking about applying for jobs as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, true or false? Because I do everything from my startup, engineering, sales, HR, marketing, I am qualified to apply for all the jobs because I do everything. I wear all the hats. So I can apply for whatever job I want. So pretty much it's an overall consensus that it's false, which it is. But you'd be surprised at how many people do not believe this. And it may not be at this extreme, right? But I've worked with people who are like, no, Corey, like I've had to do business development for my company. I had to go out and get seed funding for my company. And I also had to build the product itself because I have an engineering background. So I can do sales, I can do business development, and I can work for a VC because I know what it takes to be on the other side to raise money. Oh, and then I guess I can also be a software engineer, but I could also be a product manager, and I could also be a technical program manager as well. Oh, I could probably also do sales engineering too, Corey, because I had to do that as well. So I should just apply for all these jobs. Now, some of you may be laughing at me going, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Like, why would anyone think that?" But for those of you who have been doing your startup for a while, you have had to literally wear all of these hats. And it's very common for you to feel like you can apply for all of these jobs because you had to do all of these different things. You've had to hire people. You've had to understand HR laws in whatever state you're in, right? You had to do some data analysis. You had to do marketing. You had to like use Instagram and LinkedIn marketing and YouTube and Google ads, Facebook ads, right? You can do everything. But and someone put this in the chat, no one will hire you based on the fact that you have touched and done everything a few times. So unfortunately, you are not qualified for every single job just because you've done everything. So what jobs should you be targeting? Now, when I wrote this slide, and I'm gonna give you the context. When I wrote this slide, I I wanted to help people get a job fast. Okay. This is if you're here right now and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm running out of funding. I need to get a job. I need to support my family. What is the fastest way that I can possibly get a job? You're going to do these things. You're going to do these things. Now, last time I did this seminar, the chat was blowing up and they were like, "But what if I don't like the job? But what if I don't get paid enough? But what if the manager sucks? And what if I hate the thing?" Okay, this is to get a job fast. Obviously, you're going to tweak and adjust some things if you have more time. If you have the ability to be picky and you can vet all your managers and things like that, I totally get it. But this is if you want to get a job as fast as possible. You're going to want to do it in this potential way. Number one, what jobs should you be thinking about applying to? Well, what is your main role in your startup today? I know you have to wear multiple hats. I totally get it. But what do you really focus on? Like, what do you spend the most amount of your time on? Or what are you best at doing within your startup? Right? That's where you need to be starting. Now, if you've only been running your startup for like a year or 2 years, then maybe you don't want to necessarily over leverage what your main role is today. But if you've been doing your startup 5, 10, 15 years, think about what your main role is. Okay. Do you do more of the business development, more of the sales? Do you do a lot of the software development? Do you do more of the program management? Do you do more of the supply chain? Do you do more of the logistics? What is your main role today? That's what you should start with because employers like to hire people based on their most recent skills and experiences. Ideally, they want someone who has like recent relevant skills and a lot of it, but maybe you wanted to do a bit of a career switch and that's why you started your own company. I totally get it. So first, think about what's your main role today. And then ideally, it should hopefully align with where most of your pre-startup experience was. Generally, I've seen it work out that way. Like if you have an engineering background, when you run your own startup, you're the main CTO, right? You're the chief product officer, you're the main engineer. If you have a sales background, you started your own company, you typically tend to do a lot of the sales things because you're playing to your strengths. So most of the time, number one and number two align, but sometimes they don't. And so you'll have to determine how much experience do you have in your startup doing a certain thing if it's different from what you were doing before, and is that enough to get you qualified for the level of job that you would want? Next, ask yourself, do you have real team management experience? Not managing contractors, not working with vendors, but actually managing people in your startup. Did you have to hire people? You have to post a job, interview people, hire them, put them on a W-2 or a 1099, right? You have to do performance reviews. Do you have management experience? Now, why this is going to be critical, why this is number three, is because if you haven't been hands-on for a while, you haven't been like typing up code, or you haven't been actually like sitting in on Salesforce, entering invoices and things. If it's been a while because you've been running your own company, if you can get a managerial role, the interviews will actually be a little bit easier for you. Because if you're applying for a management job, they're going to be focusing more on the team management skills and some of the more higher level strategic stuff that you're working on, as opposed to how do you build this? What buttons do you push in Salesforce, right? It's going to be slightly easier for you if you have a management experience and you can get a managerial job. You don't have to go back to doing 10,000 leak code problems if you can get a software engineering manager position. So ideally, try to target a management role if you have the experience. Number four, and this is a big one. Sometimes you will have to forego the ego. Now, what do I mean by that in a practical sense? You were the CEO of your own company. You were the chief technology officer, the chief sales officer. You were the SVP of marketing, the SVP of sales. Does it mean you can get an
Hello.
SVP of sales role at another company? Unless your startup was probably the same size as the company
Hello.
you're applying to, not going to happen.
Hello.
Alternatively, maybe before your startup, you were a director of marketing at some large tech company, right? You were a director level person. Then you go run your startup for 5 years, and now you're thinking about getting back into corporate marketing. Are you still qualified for the same level of job that you left 5 years ago? Sometimes not, actually. Like 5 years away is kind of a long time, and the employers, the hiring managers, the recruiters, they're gonna be thinking the same thing. So you're gonna have to forego the ego sometimes, and maybe when you transition back to getting a corporate job, you may have to go down one level from where you were at before. I know, everyone's gonna be mad at me. You may have to go down a level, but the compensation bands have increased over time. So maybe even though you went down a level, you still may be making as much as you were making before. Even if you go down a level, it's going to give you time to ramp back up to things, relearn some things, and you're going to be crushing it faster than other people at your level because you're going to have way more experience. So you're going to get a promotion way faster than everybody else, right? So it could be one step back, two steps forward. And this last one here, which when I work with people, this is what we have to spend probably the most time on, is thinking about what is your scope of work and how does that translate into companies when you're applying for them. Now, when you think about your scope of work, generally you're going to want to think about what is the size of your company, and you can judge the size based on your revenue, the number of customers that you have, the number of products that you own, the number of territories that you operate in. You need to think about what is the scope of your work today, and then how does that translate to a company that is hiring you? If the company is bigger than the company that you have now, how does your scope of work translate over there? Is what you're doing equivalent to being a director over there? Or is it equivalent to being more of a manager over there based on the scope of the work? So these are the things you need to be thinking about. And that's how you're going to choose, okay, which job am I most qualified for so I can get this job as fast as possible? What are your thoughts on consulting in the same space as your failed startup? If the consultation area is something you worked in the past, if not, would this still work despite the failure? Absolutely, yes. You could definitely do some consulting in the same space. It may be difficult for people to hire you Because a lot of the consultants land their jobs by saying like, hey, here's my portfolio of work, right? Here are some of my former clients that I've worked with. Here's how I've helped them grow or achieve X, Y, and Z. So you may not have that type of leverage, but you could spin it from the other angle, right? And talk about how you've learned certain things the through how your startup unfortunately failed, and you want to help other companies, other entrepreneurs avoid the same types of failures that you did. It's definitely possible, but it's going to be much more difficult, which is why I go back to what I mentioned at the beginning. It's far better to quote unquote quit too early than too late, right? Because then you can talk about how your startup was growing, you were gaining customers, but you felt like the market timing wasn't right. And that's why you decided to step back and take a consulting position or operate as an angel investor, right? That's why it's better to quote unquote quit too early than too late, because then you can talk about a positive trajectory as opposed to how you quote unquote failed. What job would be critical thinking? Every single job has critical thinking. Other than like if you want to work at a factory, like building widgets or like being a cashier at like McDonald's or something. But every job has critical thinking. So you have to get more specific in terms of like what your main role is today. Think about like the technical functions of a company: marketing, accounting, finance, sales, engineering. Like focus on that. Financial analysis and quant. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, you can make a lot of money there working for other people. Yeah, there's a lot of money in quant, especially like data scientists. Not data analysts also make very good money, but data scientists, a lot of them have PhDs. Yeah, they start at like 300,000. So let's take a quick volunteer, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, kind of what your startup is, what you spend most of your time on, and I'd love to help you figure out what potential job would be a good fit. So does someone would someone like to volunteer? Fix your
Can you
mic.
hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. HP is weird. If you have the mic on, it messes up things during the presentation. So my background is financial. I've actually been licensed and registered Series 7 and 63. Decades in it. I was doing quant back when we called it neural nets. Just not a good time for a startup with strategies that are long-term in the current market. So I've got a strong background, self-taught and discipline in all things financial analytics. I was one of the few people that's ever passed the Series 63 without ever studying it. So I've had compliance when SEC was interested in it, trying to hire me, but I'm like, no, I'd rather go make some big money. So a natural ability to know the right and wrong to do in the financial analytical world, and a strong ability to think outside of the box and design and create platform strategies, quant formulas.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about your startup today. What is your business that you do?
The business is what's called an SMA, self-managed account, and it's doing the quant strategies inside of an investor's account for them. So think of it like a hedge fund, except that there's all the transparency because it's done inside of the accredited investor's account. And I've got a couple of clients, but it's just been with the markets and even our good results, a real bear to attract any more money. In fact, the money seems to be going all into real estate, crypto, and pot.
Uh, that's funny. And where are you based?
Right here in San Francisco, my friend.
Oh, excellent. Okay. And how long have you been doing your own quant company?
I've got started up and paused it a number of times. So this current iteration has just been for a couple of years. As far as going off on my own and doing the financial, like I said, I was Series 7 and 63 at a couple of times. I've probably got about 30 years.
Okay, but so you've been full-time running your business for, you said, a few years now?
Yes.
Okay. And then what's your main role in that business? Are you a solo entrepreneur or you have a team under you?
Solo, everything that normally a team would do, I've got contracted out.
Got it. Okay. And then why didn't you like your regular job that you were doing before? Because it sounds like you were doing something very similar, but you just wanted to work for yourself, right?
Well, I'll be blunt, the financial industry is as corrupt as it gets out there. The only thing I found was worse was when I was over in the advertising industry.
Okay, got it. All right. So it was more of like you like the job, but You didn't like
Love the job, love
the
making people
industry or
richer.
like the people you were doing the job for,
Exactly, exactly.
in a
Let's
sense.
put it this
Okay.
way, all those movies about Wall Street, it's worse than that.
Got it. Got it. Okay. All right. And so you want to continue to do what you're doing now, but
Right.
ideally just not for the same industry, which was corrupt.
Exactly. Hey, if I could find an honest firm, I'd be there in a moment. I'm still looking for one. Like I've been checking out the firms and I just, keep finding some of the same old nastiness like before. It's like, hey, come on board. Oh, you're going to be doing all your own lead generation. You're going to be paying for it, but we're going to take 80% of that profit.
Okay. Okay. And then what was the job that you had before you went full time on this?
Before I went full time, I was a broker, real estate. A broker and licensed in insurance. So, wealth manager, certified financial planner, whatever title you want to put on it. Basically, I managed people's financial world to keep them secure and to make them more money or more income, depending upon what their age level was.
And you were a
So,
fiduciary?
what's that? Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
Yes, in
Very
fact,
cool.
I'd say my two skill sets that are really good is I'm really good at financial analysis, going beyond just the math, making sense of it for myself and other people. And then I'm actually, because I've got a background in psychology, I'm really good at handling the emotions that go along in the financial world. Because there's not a lot of people in wealth management that actually know how to deal with the psychological side that comes with money. And I can tell you, it's important to have a good strategy. It's even more important how to handle the mindset of yourself and those you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, at Phoenix's situation is probably a little bit more cut and dry because he has a financial background. He was, wealth management. He just ran his own company that does basically the same thing. So his skill set is highly focused over time. So building a resume, applying for jobs, super straightforward. Obviously, he could just apply for the same
I
jobs.
have one arrow in my back, though. All of this was self-taught, and I don't have more than a preliminary college. So I don't have a degree, which most of the HR bots kick me out, even with my long-term experience. So that's the thing that I've seen actually.
But you were employed before, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
They didn't
So
care back then. They're like, can you sell? Yeah. Can you get
yeah, and
$1 million
I think
clients? Great.
I think in today's market, like honestly, experience is much more valuable than credentials now. I'm sure some companies may be more old school, right? But I think in general, if you actually had a job and you were producing well, like why would someone not hire a top performer, even if he doesn't have like a formal education? And you've passed the Series 7 and the Series 6, so like you have the credentials that speak for themselves. Now the boring answer is like he could just like Phoenix could just go back and apply and do what he was doing before, just do a little bit better on the vetting process of who he works for. That's boring. So a slightly more creative answer, and you touched on that at the end. I know you were talking about like the psychology behind money, right? So I know there's what's his name? Ramit Sethi. He has his whole thing, which is like a combination of financial education plus like holistic mental health. But there's also a company called Matson Money. They're based out of Arizona, and they basically do like coaching coaching and process optimization for wealth management companies
Oh, okay.
and people. I have two buddies who work over there. Both of them were wealth managers before. So that's like a slightly more creative answer if
Okay.
you didn't want the
Can I
standard like
DM
go
you on
back to
those?
doing what you were doing thing. So
Can I DM you on those?
yeah. And I'm sure Matson Money has like other has competitors. So I'm sure they're not the only one. But
Okay. And,
yeah,
and
for sure.
what would you call that? Like if I was going to go out looking for companies or positions, what would that be called?
Let me see what they've branded themselves as.
And then I'll also get hold of you on the side too, because again, my resume, the HR bots have just been killing it. So as much as I know it said the degrees don't matter, when I talk to people, that's true. But everyone seems to have those HR bots that are filtering out a lot of us before we even get to talk to the people.
I mean, it sounds like you've got a good network though. So
It could be a lot better.
so they brand themselves. Matson Money specializes in financial education, coaching, and helping investors discover their true purpose. What have they classified themselves? Investment services.
Okay. Can you type the name in the chat for me?
Yeah, I will. I'll do it right now.
Thank you so much. And by the way, excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. That's money. I know that there was another volunteer. Unfortunately, if I have time at the end, I'll circle back. But I have like
I'm
one more
happy to shut
section
up and
to
let
go
you take
through.
another person if you want.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I'll try to circle back if I have time at the end. It should only be about 10-ish more minutes, and then I'll circle back for the other volunteer. But hopefully that's a helpful exercise. I mean, it's slightly unexciting because he's been doing the same thing the whole time. But maybe with the other volunteer, we'll get a little creative. All right.
Thank you very much.
Of course, thanks Phoenix for volunteering. So, how do I get hired? Now that we figured out when's the right time to potentially pause, what's the right job for me if I want to get a job really fast, how do I actually get the job now? So, you can do it in this order. Let people know that you're thinking about going back to work. Thinking. It doesn't mean you're going to do it. Whenever I tell people about networking like this, everyone freaks out as an entrepreneur, right? They're like, oh my God, people are going to think that I'm a quitter. People are going to think I'm quitting. People are going to think I'm giving up. People are going to think that I suck at being my own boss. Just start broaching the topic, telling people that, hey, business is going well, but I'm also considering going back to getting a regular job. I like the stability of it. My wife is getting on my case about how I don't have vacation. I don't have enough time to spend with my kids. I'm missing my kids growing up, right? There's so many good reasons as to why you may be considering pausing and getting a regular job. That doesn't need to make you sound like a quitter or a bad boss or a bad engineer or someone who doesn't know how to run a business well, right? There's many good reasons that people understand, being humans, as to why you would want to go and get a job again. Update your resume. Duh. Okay, we all know that, Corey, right? But when you're updating your resume, you need to focus on number 3 and number 4. This is where everyone makes the biggest mistakes. Number 3 and number 4. Yes, you should have a generic resume template that you use as your base, but you really need to have customized resumes, one version for each type of job that you are applying to. And as we covered at the beginning, you're not qualified for everything. I'm sorry to tell you, you're not qualified for everything. So focus on either 1 or 2 very specific jobs that you are qualified for. 1 or 2, that's it. You should only have 1 or 2 resumes hyper focused on these 1 or 2 types of jobs. When it's hyper focused, what does that mean? Everything that goes on the resume, your 1-page or your 2-page resume, no one needs more than 2 pages, by the way. 1 or 2 pages should be hyper focused on only the relevant experience that is required for that job. So if you're applying for a product manager job, all the bullets on your resume either need to be technical, talking about how you developed a feature, worked on some bugs, right? How you launched something to production, how you did market research, how you talked about how you managed launches, right? Did you use the agile? Did you use whatever, right? Everything on the resume only needs to talk about things that are related to product management, which means when you're talking about what you were doing in your company, do you need to talk about how you went and raised money? Do you need to talk about how you did business development? No. Do you need to talk about how you did Google Ads marketing, how you ran a Kickstarter campaign? No. Everything is focused on being a product manager, and that's it. Even what you're going to talk about in terms of your degrees or your certifications or your skills, it all needs to be hyper focused for just that job. And number 4, you have the ability to be a little bit more creative with your job title because you are the CEO. You can give yourself whatever job title you want. Now, I'm not encouraging you to straight up lie, but you should consider how to play the game and optimize your resume for the ATS systems and the bots. You need to have job titles that are as close to the job that you are applying to. They need to be as close to the job that you are applying to without lying. Without lying, right? If you want to be a product manager, sure, you can give yourself the current title of Chief Product Officer or VP of Product or Lead Product Manager. That's fine because you're your own boss. You can give yourself whatever title you want. But for your jobs before your startup, right? Those need to somehow say the word product or somehow say the word manager or somehow say the word engineer, because those are the things that they care about. That's the background that these hiring managers want if you want to be a product manager. Same thing goes for sales, marketing, finance, whatever. Whatever you're applying to, all the job titles need to line up and tell a very cohesive story in your resume. And then you're going to need to take all this information and now you leverage this for your networking conversations. When people ask you, what do you do? Right? You no longer tell people, oh, I'm the CEO of a startup that does blah, blah, blah. No, you're talking now, you're like, no, I'm the chief product officer. I've developed X, Y, and Z. I did market research for this, right? I've developed and led, 6 new features, or, I was responsible for global expansion for the product. I, expanded it to multiple different languages, right? All of your networking conversations, your elevator pitches, it all needs to be hyper focused now on the one specific job that you want. One or two. I recommend you start with 1 or 2, no more than that. Test out the market, see how it goes. Are you getting interviews? And then you can always pivot and adjust from there. Yeah, and just in general, like don't put CEO as your job title. It's better to be more specific for what you're applying to. And update your LinkedIn as well. Same thing. Now, when you are trying to get these jobs, these are all the things that hiring managers are going to be concerned about. As a recruiter, I can tell you that I have these concerns. And with the hiring managers that I've worked with, I can tell you that these are their main concerns. And this is how you're going to address these. Number 1, obviously, can you be a team player again? Because you used to be the boss, the man, or the woman, the one in charge. How can you now operate in a team environment when you don't get to call all the shots anymore? How can you alleviate that concern that you're going to be, a tyrannical leader or an individual contributor that no one likes to work with? So you're just going to have to talk about examples or times, either from before you ran your company or when you were running your company. How did you work with vendors? How did you work with suppliers? How did you work with your contractors, right? How did you create a safe environment? What was some of the feedback or reviews that customers would tell you about working with you? Right? That you need to talk about examples where you've been able to create a safe psychological space, how you're able to operate in a team environment, how you're willing to put the company's interests over yourself, how you're willing to make some personal sacrifices for the betterment of the product or the team or the business, right? Have all of those examples ready to demonstrate that you are a team player. Again, of course, they're going to be asking you, why are you trying to switch? Again, like I said, better to quit too early than too late. But either way, you need to have a very good answer as to why you're looking to get a regular job again. You don't need to tell them that your startup failed, right? You don't need to tell them that. You don't even need to tell them that, and you shouldn't tell them that it's on pause. Definitely don't tell them that it's on pause. But you should have a very good answer that talks about how you're looking to take all of the transferable skills that you've gained, plus your prior startup experience, package it up, and now you present this full complete package of the perfect candidate, right? You are now the best candidate because you have hands-on experience doing this job pre-startup. You have the technical marketing skills, sales skills, software development skills, etc. And then you were able to elevate your career, elevate your skill set in a condensed period of time by running your own business, right? Maybe you were a full stack software engineer before, and by running your own business, you've now understood what it means to be in the seat of a product manager, or by being or by working very closely with your customers, listening to the market, understanding why certain features are built a certain way, or where the technologies are going to be evolving over time. Running your own startup has allowed you to get better strategic vision of where these technologies are going to be going, so that you've learned the appropriate skills, right? There's always a really good way to pitch your experience and why you are a really good fit for now this job, given the fact that you had to run your own company. Okay. Next, they're going to be asking, of course, what are you actually good at? Because they know if you ran your own company, you do everything. So they're going to want to make sure that you're actually good at the one job that you say that you're applying to. So that's why I was recommending you kind of lean more on what you're doing the most, or what you were doing pre-startup, because they're going to be testing you to make sure that you actually know this. So how you can brush up is go back to some of your former managers and colleagues and friends in that industry you were in, or in the job you had. Ask them, what are the newest technologies that people are working with? What are some of the new tools? What are some of the new key cool buzzwords that you need to be researching and studying up before you go and do these interviews? Because that's their biggest concern, is that you're a little rusty, quote unquote rusty, right? But you can alleviate that by telling them that you have been keeping up to date with all the latest software tools, methodologies, processes, etc. Newest vendors, newest competitors, all that stuff, right? Do your research beforehand. And the last one, whenever we hire someone who used to be an entrepreneur, we always run references. Always. So make sure you have your references teed up and ready to go. And you should even proactively offer them in your first conversation to show that you are confident that people can talk very highly of you. If you didn't have employees or contractors or vendors or suppliers or whoever, technically would work for you as references, then you're going to want to leverage either some of the people who give you funding, or you're going to want to make sure that you've rekindled relationships with your previous managers, bosses, and former coworkers. So get your references ready before you start to apply for jobs. You don't want to scramble at the last minute. Okay. And these can actually save you and get you more interviews as well if you're willing to proactively offer reference checks. If I have two hyper-focused resumes, product management, product marketing, then how do you recommend I position my job title from CEO? So the first one would be head of product, and the second one would be VP of product marketing. And that wouldn't even be a lie, right? Because you probably had to do both. What if you are in a new place with no references, they moved or are dead? Oh, your physical location doesn't matter because people just call anyways. If they are dead, then you got to find other people that are alive. But yeah, we do references on the phone anyway, so it doesn't matter where they live. I had to do a reference check once with someone in like South Korea. So, all right. So I open it up for Q&A, and then I will save time to go back to the other volunteer who wanted to talk about their potential job fit. Oh, you read my mind. If you wanted to contact me, careershakers@gmail.com. Also, if you wanted to sign up for a strategy session with me to talk about your career goals and planning, like what jobs you should be targeting, how we can help you get there, you can sign up for that session as well, all on my website. And I do have a YouTube channel. I post weekly videos there on general career tips. So feel free to check that out as well. Best places to look. Best places to look for, I assume, jobs. I recommend LinkedIn and Indeed. Those are probably like the two best ones to go. But there's other places. You can. There are very niche job boards now. There's one. It's called Flex Jobs. They only highlight fully remote positions. It used to be called Angels List, but they rebranded. Angels List, if you just Google it, whatever they rebranded to, there are job sites specifically only for startups. So if you want to continue working for other startups, you can check that out as well. What are your thoughts on Well Found? What is Well Found? Ah, there it is. Angels List is Well Found. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. If you like working for startups, you kind of like that like high paced, fast environment, then yeah. Startups are great. You don't always have to work for like a big tech company. You can be equally as happy, if not more happy, working for a smaller company. Since the resume will not have reference, do you recommend never mentioning it during the interview process? They're gonna probably know that it's your own company. If it's a company that, and you're gonna have to put a little description under your job title / company, put like a 1 to 2 sentence description of the company itself, but they're probably gonna know that it's your own company. But when you are doing the interviews, like to be like, well, when I was CEO, I did this. Just it doesn't have to come up that way. Yes, I will be editing the recording and then posting it and then sending it out to all of you via email. One more. I'm curious to understand what kind of reference checks, what kind of reference checks people do for a founder getting back to the job market, assuming the hiring manager or team knows I was the CEO. Yeah, so because we're hiring a CEO, we got to make sure that you're a good person to work with, and that's why we would do the reference check with ideally like someone that used to work for you or your previous boss. Those are the two reference checks that we ideally would want. Do employers care if you might continue working on your company as a side project? Yes, they definitely will care. 100%. They'll definitely care, which is why you shouldn't use the word pause in an actual interview. You would just alleviate that concern by just telling them that, you had your startup was successful, you learned X, Y, and Z, and now you want to take those skills and really help their company grow. What kind of questions do they ask? I assume that's for the reference checks. So we typically ask, what was it like working for or with someone? Did you ever manage them? Did they ever get a performance review rating? What was their rating? How would you rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 compared to their peers? What are things that they are good at and what are things that they are bad at? And then the last question we always ask is, would you want to work with them again or would you want to hire them again? All right, Samuel, let's go back to you. I know you wanted to volunteer. Are you still here? Please, if you are, come off mute and let's talk about what kind of job. So tell us a little bit about what your current company is today. What's your startup? What's your primary role in it, and how long you've been doing your own startup?
The startup is kind of on pause. It still keeps me up at night sometimes, just like thinking of like we could have done this, like X, Y, and Z. So I am like I've taken some like contract roles, but I'm looking for a full time. And what I've done with my resume is I turned my startup into a confidential client that I was consulting for, and I listed out everything that I did for it. Yeah. So, but now I'm kind of like rethinking that approach after hearing what you said. Yeah, and then just also trying to find the right fit because primarily like all my experience, like or most of it, was as a front end engineer, but it became more full stack. But like the kind of the catch is being a front end engineer doesn't really pay too well unless you do like all the leak code BS, for lack of a better word. Like I've never written any of that stuff in real life. Like so it's like I have to like train for all the BS. So like yeah, so it's just like and I'm wondering what role I should be looking for. Is it like a lead front end or I don't want to do management because I care more about your technical skills than about your soft skills. As long as you can like slack me, I'm totally fine. So yeah, I just like don't know how to what
Okay.
role should be.
Okay, thanks for the context. So let's see here. How long were you a front end engineer before you did your own company?
Geez, since 09. So it's long. It's been like 12 years now.
So 12 years working for someone else, and then how long doing your own company?
It was 2 years working for myself. So 10
Okay.
years prior and then 2. Yeah.
So you have 14 years of experience. Okay, so that puts you at like senior staff, probably, probably like senior staff level. Okay, and then so you said your first 12 years was all front end, and then in your last 2 years you've been more full stack. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, all right. And then what kind of jobs have you been applying to?
Since my passion is front end stuff, so I've been leaning more towards the front end. Today I just spoke to a recruiter who is hiring for a startup that has a like lead front end, leading like 2 other engineers. So mostly it's been like senior eng. Yeah.
Have you managed people in the past, either at your own startup or prior?
I consultants still count, like you said. In the position before the startup, it was such a flat startup that the front end team did not really have any kind of organization, but I did mentor and set up processes and like pretty much everything for the front end. Yeah. So
Did you do code review?
Oh yeah. I was
Okay.
I was the
And then were you like the technical lead for a specific like feature
Yeah.
or product?
Yeah, for
Okay.
their
So yeah. So
their,
basically if you were a technical lead, like from an Eng perspective, that's like being a manager. Yes, you didn't do like the compensation talks and all that stuff, but that's basically like the stepping stone that every engineer takes before they become an actual manager. So if you were a lead, if you were like a technical lead, then you are actually qualified to be a manager. I know you said you don't want to be one because you care more about the technical skills than the soft skills, but you kind of answered your own question, right? Which was, I don't want to do all the leak code crap again. Well, if you want to
Yeah.
skip all the leak code crap, you could take a managerial role where you typically aren't as strict on the coding, and you don't have to do as much like systems design or like data structures and algorithms and like all of that useless crap. But but if you don't want to be a manager, then you're gonna have to do more of the lead code stuff. So, like pick your battle, right, Sam, of like which one would you rather do? But if you were a technical lead, like that's what I would put on your resume, right? Like the first 12 years, the last job title should say technical lead. And then you should talk about like how many of the junior engineers mentors slash reviewed slash, help them grow in their careers, etc. And then in your current job or for your startup, I would just straight up put like, lead front end or lead full stack, whatever job it is, obviously, that you're targeting, but it should all be a cohesive, consistent story. Now, unfortunately, I don't know if just 2 years of being a full stack is probably enough to get you like a senior position for full stack.
Yeah. So I did some of at the previous company, which that role ended because of COVID. And I was there for 5 years. Like I wrote, it was kind of like mostly front end, but there was like chunks that were back end. So like I wrote some of the payment systems in like Java, along with building the front end for it.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, but I mean, it still sounds like it's pretty small experience on the full stack, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you already said your passion's more on the front end anyways, so it's kind of a moot point. But if you wanted to get a full stack role, then you'd have to do obviously a lot more like lead code stuff. But you care, or you're more passionate about the front end stuff anyways. So
Right.
and you're getting interviews, you said, right? Which is amazing given this market, like for software, especially front end, it's a tough market right now. And if you're getting leads and you're talking to people, like that's a really good sign. That's a really, really good sign.
That's good to hear because I've been getting, I'll submit resumes and see like a bunch of them like get frozen. Like, hey, companies aren't reviewing these at this time, or come back to them when things get better. So yeah,
Where do you live, Sam?
I'm in the Bay Area.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm like a remote role so I can leave because shit's expensive here.
Yeah.
Other than the fun language.
I
Yeah,
totally get it. I totally get it. But at some point, you may have to make some concessions, and that could be one of those things. But hopefully you do land something that is fully remote. That would obviously be ideal. And for those of you wondering, like I would say a general response rate you would want to get is like 10%. If you're just blindly applying online, no referrals, right? Just if you're getting about a 10% response rate, that's pretty good. Like that would tell me that your resume is probably in a good spot. If it's less than 10%, you're going to want to continue to do some additional tweaks. So I always recommend don't like shotgun your resume the first week. Pick like 10 to 20 companies that you kind of would want to work at, but they're not your first top choice. Send your resume there. See if you get 10% responses. If you don't, then you should tweak it a little bit more. Send it the next week to like 10 other companies you don't really care about. Then once you've got your resume in a good place, that's when you start to full blast, send it out, especially to the companies you really care about. Everyone does the opposite where they're like, oh, resume's done, like time to apply to Google. Don't do that. Because once you're like, once the ATS system is like, no, then every time you apply after that, even if your resume is different, it's already going to know that you weren't a fit the first time. And so you're kind of done. So, but thanks, Sam. I wish you luck, and I think it's clever how you turn your company into like a client, and it seems like it's working from a resume perspective. So that's something that some of y'all could consider doing as well, and kind of beta testing.
Yeah. So I also did like an NDA So I can't really disclose their name or anything, but I can talk about the tech and what I did there. So
Yeah.
that
Absolutely. And that's what people care about. I was coaching someone yesterday. He's also a front end engineer, and his resume was like very generic. It was like developed key features for this company's, growing app product line. And that was the whole bullet. And I was like, you need to elaborate. You need to tell them like what types of features you built or how you built them. Like, did you use Swift or Swift whatever, tell us how you did it. And he was like, no, I signed an NDA, so I can't talk about anything that I did. And I'm like, no, you're not revealing the code, or you're not talking about some super secret product that this company was developing. But you still need to be able to talk about what you actually did from a technical perspective. And it sounds like you're able to do that as well, which is why you're obviously getting interviews. So that's great. Is the corporate recruiting job that you are still in active hiring mode? Yes, my company is hiring, but only in specific areas like hardware. Hardware and machine learning are like the two big areas that are hot in tech right now. Many of my friends at high tech companies told me that their HR departments have started to freeze jobs. Yes, big tech is kind of frozen right now. Do you mainly hit people in tech? Just because I live in the Bay Area, a lot of my clients end up being in tech, but I've coached people in other industries, higher education, CPG, fashion, pharmaceuticals, biotech. I helped someone in aerospace. I helped someone in defense. Um, yeah, healthcare. How do we set up a coaching session? Sign up at careershakers.com. Any other tools you think would help us? Any other tools that I think would help you? If you don't have a LinkedIn, you better make a LinkedIn. If you're an engineer, you better have a GitHub. If you have any like patents or research articles, publications, make sure you have those on your resume if they are relevant. And you should check Google Scholar. Make sure that you do show up on there as well. For your interviews, I highly recommend, especially since all of you are probably entrepreneurs, you should have some type of like master list of your projects or your examples that you want to share in interviews.
My story. Oh, yeah.
And make sure that you have those like nailed down and know which examples and projects are best for each type of job that you're applying to. How would your advice change for startup founders looking for part-time contract positions as they pause their startup? So part-time contract positions in general are just tough to get. I was working with someone and he wanted to be like what's the word? He wanted to be like part of a board of directors. That's kind of like semi-startup-ish. I mean, like semi part-time, but part-time contract positions are pretty tough. I've only seen people do it is like senior consultants, and you agree to do it on like 20 hours a week type thing. But you might be better like if you have a successful track record, like trying to become like part of a board of directors or like sit on like some type of like VC or angel list thing. Um, but yeah, I don't have a whole lot of experience in that space, so I can't really talk about how like someone would go to find a part-time contract position. But contract positions are typically done through recruiting agencies. So you could start there. You could look at like the biggest agencies in whatever space you're in. Like if you're an engineer, Aerotech, Tech Systems are the big ones. If you're in accounting and finance, like Robert Half. If you have like a general like corporate job, Adecco places a lot of like corporate G&A functions. So you can start there and see if they have part-time roles. What about any gig work that is not Uber drivers? Anything I suggest? Oh, I mean, it depends on what your goal is, right? Like, are you trying to like just supplement your income? Are you trying to make a full-time living doing like some type of gig work? Yeah, I mean, you're better off probably, in my opinion, just getting a job. But I guess you would want a gig role because you want to do maybe half and half. Like you don't want to like fully pause your startup and you want to just make a little bit of money. Like what's a good that's not DoorDash or Uber? The tricky thing is finding a job that gives you the flexibility to make your own hours, right? Like that's probably what you would want. And that's what Uber and like DoorDash gives you access to is literally you can do it whenever you want and whenever you don't want. Um, what's like another good gig role? I don't know. Oh, like if you could like like walk dogs or something. I don't know. You probably honestly you could probably work like a retail job, like part-time and like or be like a what's it called? Like a security person that just sits at your desk and you can like do multiple things at the same time while getting paid to just sit there. Um, yeah, well, maybe TaskRabbit. That's possible. But I think it's a lot of manual labor, so depending on like everyone's comfort level and yeah. Cool. Alrighty. So thank you, everybody.